We are closing out the first letter of the Apostle Paul to Timothy, whom he calls his true son in the faith, who is, in one sense, he serves in a pastor-like role in the church at Ephesus, which Paul himself has just labored at. But in another way, he's not strictly a pastor in the way that God has given pastors to the churches. Timothy was moved around. Pastors are residents. They care for the churches that God puts them in. Timothy was like an apostolic delegate that Paul would send to different churches at different times to be able to help those churches. But in the way that he's writing First Timothy, Timothy resides in Ephesus. He's been sent to Ephesus to be able to take care of this particular church in the circumstances that they face. We have said repeatedly, because in chapter 3, verse 15, we've read it, that Paul says the church is God's family, the church is God's household. And therefore, one of the things that Paul tells Timothy, he wrote him this letter to do, is that one would know how to conduct themselves in the household of God. So one of Timothy's purposes is to teach the church as God's family, how do you act? We also probably remember, I've repeated it many times, chapter 1, verses 3 through 5, he has another mission. He has to be able to confront those who are teaching contrary doctrines to the gospel. In this way, we've said that the book of First Timothy is for the truth and the church, not only for pastors. But when we have gone through First Timothy, we see that indeed Paul gives quite a bit of time with specific instructions for Timothy to give specific sort of groups within God's family. It's helpful. Tim's Sunday school class, I guess that's what we should call it, or Bible training hour, or whatever we call from 9 to 10. But Tim was teaching on how we need to understand there's certain kinds of presuppositional views that are very, very dominant in the world today, especially in our country today, that are fundamentally opposed to what the Bible teaches us to view. And one of the things that we see in this letter that is opposed to the way many Americans assume things about the world is that God's family doesn't equally give all of God's responsibilities and even equipment to all of God's people, such that there is distinctions within the family. And those distinctions require different duties, different roles to be done. And in this way, we're able just to look at a number of the categories. In 1 Timothy, we see that Timothy has had to give instruction about who can be an elder in the church, who can be an overseer in the church, which is distinct from who can be a deacon in the church. Paul then goes on to tell Timothy that he also needs to be able to give instruction to the church when it comes to how are they dealing with widows. What kind of instruction do you give to the younger widows? What instruction would you give to an older widow? Here we're able to see God's household, God's family doesn't sort of have one kind of family member, just like your family. You have a father and a mother, and yes, they are your parents, but they are not interchangeable. You have brothers and you have sisters. And yes, they are equal, but they are not the same. You then go on and look at families, and you're able to say, as Paul's going to give instructions here, that he gives instructions to, some of us have different roles in the society. And so he gave instructions to masters, he gave instructions to slaves. And now Paul is going to give attention to what instruction does Timothy need to give to the rich. Now, again, this is relevant to presuppositions that many people, unfortunately, many evangelical so-called Reformed Christians, unfortunately, have taken on board. And that is this false notion that for there to be a right treatment of people, everyone needs to have the same things. Nowhere in the Bible is that taught, nor nowhere in the world is that true. And never in the course of human history has that ever been a realistic understanding or interpretation of the way things are. There will always be some who have more than others. There will always be some who have more power than others. There will always be some who are more intelligent than others. There will always be some who are more practically capable than others. God has ordered it such in the world that there are going to be a distribution of certain capacities, and we see that clearly. But we also see when it comes to the family of God, the church, God also makes it such that he has given to some of his children more material resources than to others. And he gives them instruction. What does God say for Timothy to teach those who in this present age have more material resources than others? Well, let's read it. 1 Timothy chapter 6, starting in verse 17. Command those who are rich in this present age not to be haughty, or to set their hope on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly supplies us with all things to enjoy. Command them to do good, to be generous and ready to share, storing up for themselves the treasure of a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is life indeed. Now, what is necessary for us as a church to understand is just the reality is God has given a differing degree of material riches or resources. I have in our minds, that's not fair. You fundamentally are calling into question God's choices. Secondly, you need to be able to realize that one of the sins that is native to the fallen human heart is called envy. And one of the reasons that there's always traction in anything that would be able to tell some of us that others of us ought not have that is because we are prone to being envious. And it is a sin. It is not a problem in God's household. It is not a problem in the church that God gives to some more material resources than he gives to others. It's been something that he has chosen to do. But that does not mean rich in this present age somehow do not need direct instruction about how to live as one who is rich in this present age. Here he is telling Timothy, this is what you need to tell those Christians in the church in Ephesus how to live, because they are rich in the present age. There's 5 directives that he gives to Timothy. Don't mind Hayden. There's 5 directives, all right? 5 directives. They're very simple and direct, all right? So it's going to be absolutely obvious what Paul lays down for Timothy to tell them. And I'm going to call them directives. The legacy says command those who are rich in this present age. But the way in which he then gives these instructions are not always with imperatives. They're not always with command, but they have the force, if you will, the force of Timothy. You're not offering these as suggestions. to those in the Ephesian church who are rich, you're actually telling them this is how you need to live. Not all of us in this room have the same amount of material resources. And that should not be a problem. I would actually like to commend Berean Community Church. I am very, very, very grateful to God that when someone comes into our church and they don't know anyone from anyone, that I know we do have people who do have riches in this present age, and we have others who do not have riches, and they love one another. They eat together at the same table at least once a month. They have genuine Christian conversation and fellowship when they gather on the Lord's Day, before we have formal worship as a church afterwards. I commend Berean Community Church that you treat people the same, no matter how much or little they have. I'm confident anyone from any place in our community could come into our congregation and you would treat them the same. I commend you for doing that. But we just also need to understand there are going to be those whom God gives more resources, material wealth. He gives it to them. And we need to reckon, we don't need to be envious of that. But if you are one of those people, you also need to realize there's certain care that you need to have. These 5 directives are for you. Now, also we need to say, in the course of human history, has there ever been a society where even the poor have what is available to us in our nation? No. So even if you do not sort of meet the tax bracket definition of rich, which I reckon is upper middle class or upper class, all right? So whatever your W-2 looks like, all right, that's not the definition biblically for being rich. It's rather is that you actually don't live day to day or week to week. That you know where meals are going to come when you just consider next week. If that's true for you, then you have to understand historically you're rich. You're not poor. Even today, the majority of the world does not have that kind of wealth. So at some level, while there is differing degrees of riches that God has given to those in our church, we are still historically rich Christians. And even right now, across the face of the globe, we are all rich Christians. So I think most of this applies directly to all of us. Here's the first directive that we have. First, don't be proud. Don't be proud. Rich Christian, do not be proud. You see that it's translated in the Legacy Standard Version as haughty. That's a good way, but we probably just don't use that word haughty very often. But it's a sense in the way in which you are able to view yourself because of your riches in the present age. You think that you are better than others, namely that you think you are better than those who have less than you. This is in one sense a perennial temptation to rich Christians. Now, let's just make sure we can figure out like, oh, that temptation makes sense to me. The temptation to be haughty because I have more. My guess is for most of you, and I don't know everybody's story, but if you do have tens of thousands of dollars stashed away in investments, 401ks or the like, property that you've invested in, it's because you've worked and you've saved and you've invested. And therefore, you rightly think, well, I have this because I did this. And you, therefore, Christian, may kind of easily imagine, I have this financial status because of what I have chosen to do, and others do not have this financial status because of what they have chosen to do. If that's the way that you think of riches, Christian, then you are going to be haughty. Because you do not think of riches, if that's the only way you think about it, if that's the way you think about it, you don't think of riches of God has chosen to give me everything that I have. Let's just imagine for the moment, those of you who have whatever your job is. Some of you fly planes, some of you fix planes, some of you design planes. Seems planes are popular for work around here. All right, but whatever it may be, like you have certain skill sets. Where'd you get those? God gave them to you. Where'd you get the opportunity to go and have an education so that you could develop those particular skills that have this kind of employment that gives you this sort of remuneration for your labor? I mean, there's a lot of smart people around the world and they don't get these opportunities. Why'd you get that opportunity? Because God gave it to you. God gave it to you. Those who are rich in the present age are rich because God gave them. God gave them these riches. So a Christian who is rich understands, yes, in the present age, I have material resources that others do not have. But I have them because God has given them to me. It's not because I am better than those who do not have them. This is a regular temptation that faces Christians. It's not your employable skills. It's not your investing wisdom. It's not just that you have worked hard. It's because God has given you the gifts and abilities and opportunities and circumstances to do those things. Don't be proud. There's nothing that you have that God fundamentally in an ultimate way did not give to you. So, as a Christian who's rich in the present age, as you interact with God's household, his family, you need to realize you're just like everyone else. You are a benefactor of God who gives richly to his people so that they might enjoy it. Don't be proud. The second directive to rich Christians, I think is most, if not all of us, is don't hope in your riches. Don't hope in your riches. Verse 17 moves quickly. He says, command those who are rich in this present age not to be haughty or to set their hope on the uncertainty of riches. Now, I'm going to say this is just don't hope in your riches, but the way in which Paul's written it, it's sort of like if a hope has to be sort of hung onto something, it has to be set on something, because all hope has an object, right? You're hoping for something. Could be circumstances, if you're dating someone, you're kind of hoping like he's going to get a ring, he's going to ask a question, all right? It's not like this sort of general idea that you're hoping for. You're hoping in something specific. In that sense, all hopes have a hook, and you have to hang them on something. When it comes to riches, what rich people are tempted to do, even rich Christians, they are tempted to imagine their material resources are the hook upon which they can hang their hopes. And again, we can understand what might you be tempted to do, rich Christian, when it comes to you're going to get sick. You're going to need to go to the hospital. I'm amazed at how many Christians are incredibly like, oh yeah, that's right, I'm going to get sick and die. Like, eureka, only one person has been raised from the dead and moved on. All right, so this is going to happen to you, and guess what? You're going to go to the hospital, and that hospital is going to send you a bill. And they're generally really, really big. Now, the rich Christian, as they imagine this, the prophetic announcement that I've made about you, you're going to get sick and die. All right, and in the course of that, the rich Christian might think, that's okay, because I have the hook of riches upon which I can set my hope. Do you know how uncertain that is? Do you know what has happened to every single rich person in the history of the world? They've all gotten sick and died, and their riches did not prevent them. Riches of the present age are uncertain. It does not matter how many you have, how invincible you think you may be because of your wealth and the resources that you might think it can indeed hold your hopes. It cannot. But that's a temptation if you possess material resources of a great degree in this present world. Likewise, you can imagine for your family, and you sort of look into the future and you have concerns about how they're going to have provision and they're going to be protected. And what are you tempted to do, rich Christian? You're tempted to imagine the hook upon which you can set your hope is your money. Again, it's really fascinating. I understand that there's old money. But you know, there's a lot of stories where there was old money, and then 2 generations later, there's no money. My father hustled hard and took a lot of risks, and he did it for his family. He created businesses, he had properties, and he had to do it to leverage equity of a 400-acre farm. He got sick and he died with a great deal of debt. It doesn't take much at all to take rich people and give them circumstances where you're not rich anymore. Christian, if you have riches in this present world, you need to realize that hook of your riches is not a certain hook upon which you should set your hopes. Do not set your hope on your riches. It is only uncertain. And what is certain is you will not take those riches with you. You leave this world just as you came, and that is with nothing. Third directive is rather hope in God. Rich Christian, this is not to say, well, poor Christians don't need to hope in God, all right? It's just the reality. What can poor Christians not do? They can't actually set their hope upon the hook of riches because they don't have riches. They're in a place where they, in one sense, have to set their hope upon God. And I have to say, if you are rich in this present age in this church, this isn't relative to you, but it is my observation in my short little time on life that people who aren't rich can actually be far more pleasant than rich people. And one of the reasons that I postulate that they might be pleasant is because rich people are just so concerned about the hook of uncertain riches upon which they're constantly hanging their hopes upon. But because of the absence of that hook, some of Christians who do not have that possible temptation, yes, they may be tempted to be envious, they may be tempted for other sins, but they cannot be tempted by this one. They're just enjoying, I'm going to trust the Lord. He's got me. And they learn to live that way. They learn to live by hoping in God. Rich Christian, that is the directive that you are to receive. Paul tells Timothy that, yes, he is to command rich Christians not to set their hope on the uncertainty of riches, but to set their hope on God. And then he says this, who richly, the play on words is obvious and intentionally, richly supplies us with all things to enjoy. Now, it's at this point that you're able to see that you cannot be a Christian who holds to what the Bible teaches and be a communist. You cannot be a Christian who holds to what the Bible believes and be a socialist. You cannot be a Christian who holds to what the Bible believes and be a Marxist. Why not? Because notice, God actually is the giver to individuals. Individuals, so that individuals have responsibility to God for what God gives them. And here is one of the responsibilities. Whatever God has given you, you have the moral obligation to enjoy it. Like you have a duty that's called enjoy. Enjoy what God gives to you. The Bible in no way is interested in some kind of ascetic, communistic approach to material riches and resources. The Bible is very clear that the way God has ordered the world and the way even He has ordered His own family in the world is there will be some who have many things in this present age. And one of the things that God has given them these many things to do is you are to enjoy them. But it is also true that God gives to all of us things, and all of us have this duty to enjoy what God gives us. Why? Because that's why God gave it to us. Do you notice what Paul says? It's an expansion on God. We are to hope in God. And what kind of God is God? He is a kind of God who richly, lavishly, super abundantly supplies us with things to enjoy. This is wonderful, but it's very significant if you have propensities towards ascetic attraction in the Christian life. So I'd just choose some. Coffee. All right, because some Christians think they're more holy because they don't like coffee. You're not. The fact is God gave coffee to us, and I mean, like, it's mysterious, isn't it? A bean that grows on a bush in higher elevations around the equator that can sort of be figured out, harvested, roasted, and then you pour boiling water on it, and it can make a stimulating beverage. Like, why is that? Well, because God is the kind of God who gives generously, richly, lavishly things to us to enjoy. Right? So fill in the blank. I understand some people may think that Coca-Cola is of the devil. But you can take a Coca-Cola ice cold in an aluminum can and peanuts. And you eat that together. Why does that taste so good? Because of God. That's why it tastes so good. He richly gives things for us to enjoy. Your duty, Christian, with whatever relative material resources He has given to you in this age, is to enjoy them. So in, I don't know, roughly 30 minutes, we have a moral obligation. You're going to have to eat with a happy heart. If you complain about roast beef sandwiches, guess what? You sin. You sin. Now, we laugh, but it's actually true. Whatever God has provided for us this afternoon, if you have a complaining heart, that's because you're sinning. It might be beans and rice. It could be filet mignon. But whatever it is, our obligation is God has given it to us for us to enjoy. We need to enjoy what God gives to us. If you are rich in this present age, you do have to realize that is why God has given you, in part, the resources that He has. He made this choice. Some of you are like, I'll take that. I would like that calling, God. Please give me that kind of burden to bear. The burden of bearing, material riches to enjoy. But the point is this is the God in whom you hope. You hope in this God. It is not in the riches that He gives to you, though they have God's intentional purposes. It is the God who gives them. You do not need to be confused that your hope is set upon what He gives. No, it must be set upon the giver. That is why you have to understand the function of the gift. The function of the gift is you need to learn how to enjoy it, but you do not need to replace the giver who gave it. That can be tricky for us sinners, can't it? This is the instruction that especially rich Christians, which generally that would refer to all of us, we need to be told this. Put your hope in God. He is certain, fixed, but He does richly give us things to enjoy. Here is the fourth, and this does build upon another purpose for the riches that He gives to us, is that if you are rich in this present age, if you have material resources, then you need to be rich in good works. Now, Paul gives directions. How are you to be rich in good works? Verse 18, do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share. Now, the first thing that we have to realize, if you have material resources, you therefore need to understand you have, at one level, you have more opportunities than those who have lesser material resources in the present age. And what you are to understand is those resources that are given to you, you are to leverage them for actually doing good, not like thinking good things, doing good things with the resources given to you. The fact that God chooses to give to some of his sons and daughters on earth means that he has given them to you so that you will be a faithful steward with more. The reality is that if you have been given more riches, a greater degree of maturity is required of you to do good than it would be of someone who has lesser resources. God requires faithfulness of both Christians who are rich and Christians who are poor, but the rich are entrusted with an opportunity to be faithful with more in the present age. They will therefore be judged on the basis of their faithfulness with the greater opportunity that they had. There will not be excuses for Berean Community Church when we stand before our Lord and say, we just didn't have a lot of resources. We didn't have what it would take to be able to do what you commanded us to do. That won't be what we will say. We won't say anything. But we will know what God gives to us is the degree to which God wants us to be faithful to do good works with them. Christian, you need to understand that you have this kind of responsibility before God so that your earthly riches are to be used so that you can become rich with good works. You need to store up good works in the same way that a sort of wise businessman seizes opportunity to turn profit. That's where we get into the next instruction that he gives us that is, again, telling us to be rich in good works. To be rich in good works. Rich people, rightly, you have to keep up with your bank accounts and like how much money is in this and how are they going to tax that and when can I draw this out? Like, so I'm told, all right? But in that sense, you're having to think about in one sense, the fact that you are rich. The instruction here is you actually need to give your attention to be rich, that superabundant account of good works with your money, with your earthly resources. So in the same way that a businessman would be able to be opportunistic to turn profit, Christians with earthly resources need to be opportunistic to turn profits for good works. Two attributes are then given for us to be opportunistic with our earthly resources to become rich in good works. And we have to be generous and we have to share. You have to be generous and you have to share. Look again at verse 18, to be generous and ready to share. Now, I think this is the sort of marks or attributes that leads to becoming rich in good works. But when you think of what does it mean to be generous? What does it mean to be generous? That means you're to be liberal. I know some of you might I don't even know if that word can fall from my tongue. You are to be liberal with your money. Now, some of you definitely can't say those words. When it comes to how you consider your earthly resources, Paul is saying you need to be generous. There's an opportunity that you see and you're wondering, what should I do? You need to be thinking, well, if I'm generous, there's a certain way I would respond. And a generous person sees that opportunity and doesn't just go what is required, they keep going. Now, in no way am I trying to be pietistic, all right? So this is an illustration only to sort of try to get at, are we generous or not? But I'm not trying to give you some sort of self-made law that applies to you, all right? So it's just an illustration. But how do you tip? Are you generous? Are you liberal? Are you stingy? Are you miserly? Just an illustration to try to get us to assess what marks me when it comes to how I use my resources. When someone does work for you and they kind of come in and maybe that work is like, man, what a deal. I don't see how he's turning a profit on this. Do you think, I think I'll just pay him more? Are you generous? Like, is that an attribute of you? Or are you stingy? Are you a hoarder? Are you a miser? The second is like, do you share? And this has to do with this disposition that marks the Christian who is going to be rich in good works, is when they look at what they have, their riches, they see it as, this is for me to share. So they understand that indeed God has given to me as an individual Christian earthly resources, but they understand that they are now a conduit of those resources that are going to extend blessings to other people. That's the way they understand their resources. I share. I share. Do you share? Now, children, I am sure you hear your parents telling you all the time, stop fighting, share. If you are rich, Christian, then you need to realize one of the markers of your life so that you'll be rich in good works is that you share. Now, what is required of sharing? You don't think everything is given to you to terminate on you. Other people are the objects upon which your material resources can terminate. There's an other-orientedness for the generous, sharing Christian who is rich in good works. Now, we can look at our lives and our bank account and our garages. You look at my garage, you're like, did you study that passage? All right, like, it's not like I just don't know if I have discernment. Like, it's kind of easy to see if we share and are generous. That's the way resources are. They're objective, they're limited, they're finite. You can measure them. Paul tells us that we are to be rich in good works. So this is why you need to understand that communism, Marxism, socialism, in its various forms, it's fundamentally committed to foster envy. And it hates the idea that there actually could be an individual who is given resources who now has the personal obligation and therefore individual liberty. Choose to give, choose to share. The Bible clearly looks at resources in this way. God gives to individuals and then commands them. Be generous, share, be rich in good works. The problem is not that there are rich people and there are poor people. The problem is that they're envious people and that they're selfish people. See, the problem is that they're sinners who live according to their sin. If you're a Christian, then we know indeed this is what God has saved me to be delivered from. And so if he gives you good riches in this world, you use them for good works. And here's this directive number 5, the last one for this morning. Why do we do this? In one sense, what's the result of living this way? It's not because God accepts us for what we do with our money. We're not earning God's acceptance or favor or forgiveness by the good works we can do with earthly resources. So why do we do this? What comes of this? And Paul tells us that in verse 19, storing up for themselves the treasure of a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is life indeed. 2 key terms here help us to understand this. One, in the first clause, a good foundation for the future. And the second one is that which is life indeed. So Christian, what you are in one sense in the present age with your present resources is you live in this age, but you actually are living for the age to come. I was trying to think of an analogy, and this is not going to work, so don't take it too far. But you're kind of like, tea. Imagine some solution. The best I could think of was tea, all right? So in one sense, there is a mixing of the Christian in the present age that we have in one sense, whatever the tea bag leaf thing does, to where, we live in this age, and it's not that we're completely tea. We're watered, and some of us are more watered down than others, all right? Some of us are stronger in that age. But when it comes to us, all of us as Christians, we have tea. We have the tea bag. We have the influence of the age which is to come. That's the tea in my metaphor. But we live in the present age. That's water. So in the metaphor, non-Christians have no tea bag, none. It's just water. The age to come, in one sense, is sort of dipped into our lives such that it's a solution that mixes in with how we use our present resources, how we understand our present resources, how we understand our present lives. And in that sense, the age to come kind of can become more and more potent or stronger in our life. And for rich Christians, if you want to be a strong, in one sense, cup of tea, you're living for the foundation of the future. That is the age to come. And you're also living because you know that it's then in that age to come that you will grab hold of eternal life. That is what is life indeed, true life. So it works this way. You're a rich Christian, you have your resources, and you're choosing to do what the many things that you can do with your riches. But you make a deliberate decision to use your resources for good works. Because you know the age to come is where you are going. And there, in that future age, is where life indeed, true life, is actually going to be had. So this is what it does for us. You don't actually have any real care of what you give away, of the money that you don't spend on this or that, because you understand real life is mine already, but it's going to be given to me in the future. So everything that we give away now, every use that we have of our monetary resources now, we actually do not lose it. It is going to be given to us in the future age with the real life which is to come. We're building of that life right now with the use of our monetary resources. In that sense, I think Paul is saying, because you, in one sense, you have dipped into the solution of your life, the age which is to come, then as you are building up through the use of your resources to have good works, you are becoming more potent, stronger in the present life with the influence of the age to come. That's why you use your money this way. That's why you use your earthly resources for good works. That's why you are generous. That's why you share. That is the true life that is yours in the age which is to come. Your riches will not be there. But what you do with your riches now builds up the foundation for the age to come. In that sense, Christian, it really does matter. It really does matter what we do with our money. It really matters. Not in the way Dave Ramsey says that it matters, though his counsel is generally good and hard to follow because it requires discipline and self-denial. It matters because of the age to come. What we do with our riches now matters because of what it can do for us in the age to come. Christian, if there's questions, come and talk to me afterwards. Hopefully I can clarify those. Jesse is going to come and lead us in a song, close us in a benediction, and then we'll convert this room to be our dining hall.